Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 157 and I am the show's host Kyle. Joining me on today's show is Will Porter. Will Porter is a writer and a freelance journalist whose work can be found at the Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com, and at the Daily Sheeple. Will, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Kyle. Thank you for having me on. How are you?
I'm doing well. Like Will's work, this podcast and my work can be found at libertarianinstitute.org. They have author pages up there now, so I think if you go to K. Anzalone, you'll find mine, or W. Porter, and you'll get Will's. So Libertarian Institute / either of those little tags, and you can find all of our work. So I'm bringing Will back on the show today, and I think this is the third or fourth time I've had him on the show to discuss this, and this is the Russiagate scenario and the whole narrative that's been going on for the past 18 months now. This all started pretty much immediately after Trump wins the election. If you remember back to September, October 2016, and the summer months there, it was Trump who was questioning the integrity of the election. But as soon as Hillary Clinton loses, suddenly the pressure is now on, I guess, the left to develop an excuse. And we get this narrative that Russia hacked the U.S. election. So, Will, I guess, do you want to just start all the way back there and kind of take us like where this actually was and what the claim was way back at the start of this whole thing?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, before we get into the indictment stuff, we should get into this is like the original sin of Russiagate. So, yeah, soon after the election, before the 2016 election concluded, there were claims that Russia had hacked the Democratic National Committee and leaked emails that were harmful to the campaign of Hillary Clinton. And so that's sort of, this basic claim has been the genesis of like every Russia claim since, which have since evolved into, broader and broader accusations. However, there's some reason to doubt these initial claims. There's a group called the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity who released a memo that basically challenged the claims of the DNC and the company they hired, CrowdStrike, to investigate this. There was we've covered this on the show, of course, in depth, so your listeners can go back and find that episode.
I'll definitely link to the episode in the show notes page.
Yeah, where we get into this whole thing with Guccifer 2.0, who's this guy who was purported to be the Russian hacker. But there was an investigation into the stuff that he had leaked, allegedly, and it found that it was more likely to have come from an internal leak instead of a foreign hack. And so this kind of threw a lot of the initial claims into question about the initial, hacking allegation. And of course, as I should have mentioned first, I think, are the two intelligence reports released by parts of the intelligence community. One in December of 2016 and then the other in January of 2017. And if you go through these reports, these are really like the core primary source material documents for the Russiagate claims. And if you really look through these, there's no real solid evidence of any of this. There's just lots of claims of links and assessments, and we assess this, we assess that, which is language they don't typically use when they're certain or confident about something. And so I think between this critical analysis by the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity and just the lackluster evidence that's been put forward by the intelligence community, I think we have pretty good reason to doubt this initial claim.
Right. And then one of the other things I want to talk about that just kind of adds to the case that it was a leak and not a hack was the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity memo identifies how there was a certain amount of speed. They know, I guess, the amount of time and the speed at which the file was downloaded that eventually led to the DNC leaks. That file was downloaded faster than it possibly could have been transferred, through all the cables and stuff to Eastern Europe. And then they found that the time it was downloaded was approximately the time it would take if you were, downloading it with a thumb drive off the computer, highly suggesting it would be a leak.
Right, exactly. And there have been critics who come out and challenge that claim about the file transfer speed, but the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity group, they conducted a bunch of experiments and they found that no, they could not get it any faster when they were doing it a remote transfer.
And then the other claim is for the Podesta emails, also claiming that those are a hack. However, it's likely, I think, that Podesta was phished and his password was password, and there just wasn't a whole lot of security there. And so, even though, this has been more or less proven that this definitely wasn't a hack by Russia, you still get the, left-wing pundits and everybody saying Russia hacked the election. Look, they stole the Clinton campaign emails.
Right. And this has allowed them to continue to unfold more and more allegations. They've kind of gotten away from the hacking thing. They'll just throw it in there now. They just have this sort of deluge of claims.
Absolutely. The next thing I want to move on to, kind of the two major things, are the two major indictments that have happened before this. are one for General Flynn and then for Paul Manafort. I believe Flynn just pleaded guilty, right? And I don't know if he was actually indicted at any point. But I'm going to go ahead and play a clip here. Jeremy Batch, who is a former Pentagon chief of staff, discussing this with Brian Williams.
The very first thing the president did after he was elected during the transition is he authorized Mike Flynn, his then national security advisor to be, to engage in a secret deal with the Russians to say to them, we will not retaliate. We will not impose sanctions on you for meddling in our election. That shows the extent to which Donald Trump and his team welcomed this assault on our democracy.
Okay, Will, so do we have proof that the Trump administration colluded with Russia with Mike Flynn being the intermediary?
Yeah, in this case, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that that's really what Flynn, first of all, was accused of in the first place, of saying, oh yeah, no problem, Russia, like, we don't mind that you interfered in our elections. I think what Flynn had said was just like an offhanded remark, who, by the way, this was the administration, like, waiting to take power. They had won the election at this point, and so it's not, I don't know, it's not campaign collusion, it's the government in waiting who's talking with other foreign governments. And so I believe what Flynn had told the guy he was talking to, the Russian diplomat or whatever, was just like, don't worry about it, we'll hammer out the sanctions thing, we'll get it figured out. It wasn't assuring him that absolutely, we don't mind if you interfere in our, like, that was a complete exaggeration, I think.
Right. I think what the statement more or less was saying, or what Flynn was saying in that statement, was don't overreact, don't react to the Obama sanctions, which are overreactions. Just wait till the new administration comes in, which Russia was probably already planning on doing anyways. Obviously, the United States is kind of in a unique position as far as world governments go, where our president wins the election and then doesn't take office for another 2.5 months. In other countries, it's typically a parliamentary thing, so they may know who's going to take president, but they're actually not elected until the votes are all cast.
Right, and who knows how many similar discussions take place with other foreign diplomats, about like, oh, don't worry about the prior administration's policy and stance, we'll hammer that out. Like, I'm sure there were tons of conversations that the future, the Trump administration in waiting had with foreign diplomats. So if you just focus on this one case, of course, you can make it look really, really dark and sinister, but if you expanded it to look at how many other countries did they talk to, it's likely several.
Well, and you could go back to Obama, and I think 2011 or 2012, while he was president, I believe he told Dmitry Medvedev, then Russian president, that he would have more flexibility on U.S. deployment of anti-missile systems in Eastern Europe after the election. And so while not exactly the same thing, I think that could even be seen as a little bit more misleading as far as to the U.S. voters, because this happened before the election and not after.
Right. It's a good point.
And then the last thing I just want to point out is that Michael Flynn was not indicted and he wasn't charged for, colluding with Russia or helping to hack the U.S. election. He was charged with lying to the FBI, which basically means that if you talk to the FBI and then you can't repeat back what you said to them verbatim, you're open to being charged with lying to the FBI. All right. I also want to discuss the Paul Manafort indictment, just because this seems to be a pretty big one, especially from the left-wing media, on something that, they've kind of busted the Trump administration and proved collusion. So I'm going to go ahead and play a clip from the Rachel Maddow show on that.
Paul Manafort, if you had to pick a guy in the Trump campaign orbit who might end up getting in trouble in the special counsel Russia investigation, it wouldn't be crazy to pick Paul Manafort. He was a really high-profile figure in the campaign. He'd been campaign chairman. He'd left the campaign under a cloud of suspicion over his doings in the former Soviet Union.
Okay, well, so do they have Trump nailed to a crosshair with the Paul Manafort indictment?
No, I think this one's kind of more of a red herring. Honestly, like, first of all, it has, as I think you'll point out, Maddow refers to Ukraine as the former Soviet Union, but of course there's no relation here really to Russia. It's talking about Ukraine, and so it's kind of a red herring to include this as part of the collusion with Russia narrative. I tend to think that many politicians and many people who had been lobbyists before, if you look into their past, I tend to think you'll find a lot of stuff like this in a lot of foreign countries.
Right. And just to point out with the USSR thing, how dishonest it is by Maddow, because what Manafort was charged with was, I guess, kind of like embezzling money and money laundering with some Ukrainian oligarchs. And because Ukraine is a separate country from Russia, and pretty distinctly so right now, where there's pro-Russia factions fighting a civil war against the Ukrainian government, it's pretty clear that doing business in Ukraine is not doing business with Russia. She calls Ukraine a former USSR country, which is true, but Ukraine is no longer part of Russia and, like I said, is, distinctly fighting a war kind of against Russian interests right now. And so in order to kind of conflate the issue and make it seem like this is proof that Trump was in bed with the Russians, she points out that Paul Manafort, was doing business with people in the former USSR. It's so dishonest. And this is kind of, I think, just the general trend of how things have been for the whole Russiagate scandal, is that they take something, they twist the facts a little bit, and then make it seem like they have a whole big collusion mosaic up on their boards.
Yeah, there was no good journalistic reason whatsoever to refer to it like that, the former USSR. That's just obviously she's trying to taint the narrative. She's trying to put a particular spin on it.
All right, well, so now we get the actual indictment yesterday, and this is 13 Russians, I think 3 Russian companies, and then it mentions one American who had, I guess, agreed to go along with be a test, support the Mueller investigation and form some sort of leniency or plea deal or something like that. So, Will, what did you think of the actual indictment? Is this proof, again, that Russia hacked the election?
Well, I think the first thing that should be pointed out about the indictment is that it doesn't mention actually the Russian government really anywhere. It's referring to these private entities which are claimed to have links with the Russian government. And I don't just deny that outright. Perhaps they do have links, but there's no evidence really put forth for what those links are. And I think that that's a common sort of thing throughout this whole Russiagate phenomenon, is that there's no real solid evidence for anything. It's always links. So there's Russian links, and this is a threat group that's been linked with this. And I don't know. It's not. It's just like a lot of connecting the dots, a lot of conspiracy theorizing that I think doesn't really hold up under scrutiny. And so, yeah, I think that's the main thing that should be drawn from this, is, or at least that should be pointed out, is that nowhere does this really refer to the Russian government. We're talking about 13 people who were involved in internet marketing and trolling.
Yeah, as you'll hear in a minute, most of the reaction, especially from the left, is this is proof that Russia invaded, hacked, attacked, all these kind of, very hawkish lingo against the Russians. They use all this as kind of saying that this is what happened. But as you'll kind of see, and, as me and Will talk about the indictment, you really don't get that at all. What you have in the indictment is, people essentially, from Russia who were running Facebook ads and trying to generate some sort of social media presence. But if you look through the indictment, you'll see that some of it was pro-Hillary. I think they tried to organize a pro-Hillary rally. I think they tried to organize, pro-Hillary or pro-Trump rallies. One of them had like 8 people attend, one had 45 people attend. Some of the stuff they were doing was pro-Sanders, some of it was pro-Jill Stein. But in the end, it was all over the landscape. Some of it started all the way back in 2014, which was long before, Trump or Sanders declared they were running for either the Democrat or Republican primary. In fact, I don't think it was clear in 2014 that Bernie Sanders was a Democrat or Donald Trump was even a Republican. So, I find it somewhat amazing to me that this is somehow proof that Russia hacked the election. Also, again, you have some of this stuff occurring after the election. And so to say that this is proof that it had something to do with the election, it seems to me that you have a lot of trouble actually saying that this had anything at all to do with the election, other than that they were sharing memes of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, which, in 2016, who wasn't sharing memes about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump?
Right, absolutely. And I think something else that should be noted here too is that the consequences of these indictments probably are not going to be very monumental in terms of like a legal case, or in terms of like an actual legal outcome, because these people will probably never be brought to trial in the United States. Russia is not going to extradite them. And so I don't know, I think you might describe this more as an act of political theater than a real, legal case.
Right. And from my understanding, well, and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, it's not that these people are thought to have actually be agents of the Russian government in any way, right? Like, they're not saying that, KGB agent so-and-so working for this front company was running this operation. There's no proof of any kind of that going on.
No, at least nothing anybody's saying explicitly. I've heard a lot of this implications of like, well, the Internet Research Agency, which is the primary agency that was, these 13 people worked under this rubric, or they helped to finance it or whatever. But the people say that the Internet Research Agency is linked to the Kremlin, or is linked somehow to Russian intelligence. But I've never, that's not in the indictment, and that's not what the FBI is saying at this point, or the Justice Department. That's just what I'm hearing from people. They're saying, oh, well, we know this is a Russian government thing because it's linked. It's been linked to the Kremlin in the past.
And also, from my understanding, none of these people worked for the Trump administration or in any way seem to have any contact with the Trump administration.
Not as far as I know, no.
I had read some people saying that maybe some of these fake accounts had reached out to people in the Trump administration, but it definitely doesn't seem like any of the 13 people indicted were in any way working with the Trump administration on their plan to, hold a pro-Trump rally or whatever they were trying to do.
Right. As far as we know, these 13 people were just somehow involved in the operation of like the social media campaign. This, what could be called trolling, or what is one theory described as marketing, that this is actually more of a marketing operation intended to generate clicks and traffic, And so maybe we can include.
Yeah. Do you want to get into that a little bit more? And then I'll go ahead and link to that Moon of Alabama article. But this is a theory by Bernard at Moon of Alabama, who kind of explains what he believes the Russian company was doing in the United States. And his general thesis is that they weren't really going after or trying to undermine the campaign in any way, but trying to generate some business in the United States by basically, having people click on the Google ads related to these fake Facebook accounts.
Right, exactly. That's pretty much the gist of the story. Like, your audience can go and check out the actual piece that gets into the details. But they'll see how, like, some of the people who were involved in this Internet Research Agency project, how in their past they had worked on similar things with social media marketing, and that's sort of like their gig. And so, it's certainly possible that they're just people with those skills who were, recruited by the KGB or whatever the equivalent agency is now to subvert American democracy. But it's also possible that they're just one of many similar, social media influence operations out there in the world. There's tons of them in many countries.
Right. And I guess just to kind of explain what this company does is the company was founded by a guy who was selling bad, not bad as in poisonous, but bad as in poor quality, poor tasting cafeteria food to kids. And so I guess the kids were going on social media and complaining about it. To counter this, he created a company where he hired some guys to go out there, create fake Facebook accounts or whatever social media platform they were using. And then they would go and spam and say, oh, I think the food's delicious. Timmy is, just lying about it because his mom told him to, and all this other stuff. And so then he kind of develops this into a company now, where imagine if you're running, you start a new business and, you're trying to generate some people come into your new business. And so one of the ways to do that is by having a really good Yelp page. And so, pay this guy $500, and then he goes out there and he creates a bunch of fake accounts, and they go and review and say, oh man, Jose has the best burritos on the whole block, and you got to come here. And some other guy says, wow, this food's amazing. And if somebody says, oh, I found a hair in my taco, they'll go out there and make sure that there's 400 more saying, oh, the guy who runs the stand is bald, and this is obviously untrue. And so these are the kind of tactics that they're using. And this is the kind of company that the U.S. indicted for hacking in the Russian election.
Exactly. Yeah, you just explained it very well. And there are many such companies in the United States, in Russia, in Ukraine, in Israel, everywhere. There's, such things going on.
Right. I get, now that I have a podcast on iTunes that gets some traffic, I get emails from these people I would say like on a monthly basis, just saying, hey, do you want some, good advertisement? We could give you some good reviews on iTunes or stuff like that. So it exists. You get the spam messages all the time. I want to go through and play some clips from some people in the mainstream media talking about their reaction to the indictment, because I think it's kind of telling, and it'll give me a chance to break down a lot of the myths about the indictment. So I'll go ahead and play the first clip, and this is going to be Tucker Carlson and Rod Rosenstein.
But none of it seems momentous. Here's what's not in the indictments. Any evidence at all that any Russian behavior changed a single vote or did anything to sway the election in any direction. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein admitted as much today. Watch.
There is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
In a statement this afternoon, the White House even boasted about today's news. Quote, President Donald J. Trump has been fully briefed on this matter and is glad to see the special counsel's investigation further indicates that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And that's basically true.
Okay, well, what do you think of the Rod Rosenstein and Tucker Carlson take on the indictment?
Yeah, well, I certainly thought that was interesting. I've heard some people try to sort of spin this around and say that, oh, well, this indictment doesn't implicate Trump or his people, but future indictments will, that there's still something out there. And so people are still finding a way to maintain that this has, there's some collusion angle to this. But yeah, I mean, as you heard, it's clearly stated that nobody in the U.S., except for maybe this one guy who was involved in identity theft or whatever, no Americans, though, were involved in colluding with this, and certainly nobody in the Trump campaign.
Right. I think Tucker's response was actually one of the more accurate. One thing you can say, and that people will point out, is that, that while this doesn't indict or prove collusion with the Trump administration, it also doesn't explicitly say there isn't any. Absence of evidence doesn't necessarily mean that it happened the way you said it did. So I think that's a problem that they fail to answer pretty frequently, and I think that's a logical fallacy that Rachel Maddow makes a lot of time in her analysis. Other than that, it does seem to me that this, may be it. That maybe this is all they have. This is all they could prove. And Tucker Carlson is right in that this is proof that there's no collusion between the Trump administration and Russia.
Yeah, now, if the critics are right, then I guess they'll say we just have to wait and see if more indictments come out. And certainly, what else can we do but wait? But yeah, so far this is not looking too good. You would have thought that if they had something more explosive, perhaps they would have rolled it out a little, first instead of this thing. If they had something really implicating the administration or somebody linked to the administration, you would think they would have rolled that out first, those indictments first, and not this tangential troll social media operation.
Right, and I guess this is as good as time as any to bring it up. The FBI right now is in some turmoil over the election. It's not about Russiagate. It's about the Steele dossier, the DNC, and how the FBI was signing off on FISA warrants to go after the Trump campaign, pretty much at the hands of a fake dossier. So, this is a really interesting point, something that I didn't plan to discuss a whole lot on this show, but that all of this is, occurring in the wake of FBI officials resigning, McCabe pretty much being fired, from my understanding. He was forced to resign before he would even get his retirement pension. And, so I guess, they would also have to prove that the Trump campaign would have had to interfere more than the DNC did by hiring Steele to make a fake dossier.
Right, Steele, who, by the way, was a former Foreign Intelligence Service agent of the MI6. So that's kind of an interesting angle. If we're talking about foreign interference in an election, I don't know, does that qualify?
Right. I always find that interesting, is that Manafort was working with the Ukrainians and Steele was working for the British, and we still only get Russiagate and Russia collusion.
Right.
All right, well, so if you're all right, I'll go ahead and move on to the second clip I have of a response, and this is from Rob Reiner when he was on the Tucker Carlson show.
All I know is what has happened is that we've been invaded, and they continue to do to try to disrupt our democracy. And like you just pointed out early, they'll go on both sides. They'll try to help Bernie, Jill Stein.
Do you think the Russians...
anything to disrupt the democracy?
So Tucker interrupts Rob Reiner right at the end a little bit, but what he's saying is the Russians will do anything to disrupt our democracy. Will, what do you think about Rob's response?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that also in the intelligence community report, the assessment where they sort of went after RT, or Russia Today, a Russian media outlet, sort of criticizing them for hosting third-party U.S. debate candidates. And so it's like promoting American candidates is considered like destroying our democracy. And I don't know, I think there's a fine line between social media activism when you're trying to comment on another country's elections and like foreign interference. I don't know. I tend to think that it was the former in this case.
Right, and you would imagine that a lot of this criticism and a lot of the push would be at the fact that I believe, was it the Podesta emails or the DNC emails that revealed that Hillary Clinton got debate questions from Donna Brazile before the CNN debate?
I forget which batch it was in.
Anyways, some of these email leaks made it very clear that the DNC was very much in favor of the Clinton campaign and very much helped her to win that election primary against Bernie Sanders. And so for Rob Reiner to say that Russia was attacking our democracy by pointing out that Hillary Clinton and her, candidacy in the DNC was corrupt by undermining democracy themselves. And so, I don't know, it just seems so hypocritical and stupid.
Definitely. And not to, this is a bit tangential, but I think the point should be raised that the United States is certainly not innocent in election meddling overseas. And it goes way beyond trolls and, social media influence operations. We do way more to subvert other people's democracies than that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Now, sometimes I'll bring that up and people will accuse me of doing something called gaslighting, I believe. Is that the term for it, Will?
I think gaslighting, it's like when someone tries to make you think you're crazy.
I think they're saying that you're like, they're bringing up a good point, but then you just bring up a bigger point. It's a way to like cheat in the debate or something.
Like, right, like whataboutism. Yeah, some people call it whataboutism.
Yep, there you go. And so I've been accused of that for bringing up that point.
Anyways, that's kind of, I was just going to say, no. That's just why I hesitated to even bring it up. That's the last point. Is just like, because I know people would accuse somebody of whataboutery for that.
All right, so I want to move on next to talk about Chris Hayes' response, and he responded in a tweet. I'll link to it on the show notes page, and I'll just read it for you right here. What the indictment reveals is that there was essentially an entire shadow campaign, money, structure, organization, ads, metrics, all of it, run by the Russian government, and it spent much of 2016 trying to elect Donald Trump president. Will, what does the indictment show this?
No, simply it just doesn't. Like, you'd have to make a further argument than the indictment to, you'd have to have something in addition to the indictment to make it about the Russian government. So far, we're just talking about Russian citizens. And there's a lot of conflation going on with this, where people are saying Russians or the Russians. Typically, when someone says the Russians, that implies the government. But a lot of the times it's just being used here just to talk about any people who happen to be Russians. So it's kind of misleading.
Right. These are just Russian people. It isn't the Russian government. I think Rachel Maddow specifically calls it a Russian intelligence operation against the United States of America, which seems to be an absolute unproven falsehood. I don't even know where she would get enough evidence to even make that claim, even if she dismisses everything that's been debunked.
Right. It's all about links, just these ambiguous links, to the Russian government.
Right. The only thing I want to point out about the Chris Hayes tweet specifically is when he talks about the money, the organization, the ads, the metrics. I mean, they spent like $1 million total on ads, right, in a $2 billion election. If the Russians were able to undermine the American, first of all, I need these people to help me to design some Facebook ads, apparently, because I can't get any traction, and somehow these people are swaying a whole election with $1 million in ads. Anybody who has used Facebook, Twitter ads, Google ads, know that is not enough money to make any real difference.
No, and I mean, if you look at like the percentage of like the Russian linked Twitter accounts that are said to have been tweeting about the election, they made up like 0.02% of all the election related tweets. So it's just the tiniest, not even a drop in the bucket. It's less than a drop.
And as far as structure goes, something that was pointed out in the Moon of Alabama piece was just that a lot of these guys were like temps and interns, just kids hired off the street that can make fake Facebook account and retweet memes, right? That's all they were doing. It wasn't like super sophisticated or anything like that.
No, not at all.
Now I want to play the reaction. I believe this is from Brian Williams, the MSNBC host, as he responds to the indictment.
Day 393 of the Trump administration. This day was different because this is what we learned today. We learned that Russia interfered with our election. We learned how it helped the Trump campaign and how it hurt the Clinton campaign. Russia took advantage of our society, our First Amendment, and our social media, and our deep divisions. This was an asymmetrical act of information and psychological warfare, and it never stopped. They came into our country physically, and they reached in electronically. They changed what we read, what we saw, and what we heard, and in some cases, they changed our minds. And with a few hundred people and a few $1 million, they proved it was an astoundingly successful attack by a hostile nation on our own soil.
So, Will, that is the Brian Williams take on the indictment. What do you think about his idea?
Well, of course, he's just repeating a lot of the same conflation about Russians and the Russians. So, of course, he's insinuating that this is a big Russian government operation when we don't really have any proof to support that. And there's I think a lot of hay is being made about the outcome of all this stuff, but I think based on what we know, the social media operation didn't really do much at all. As I had just said, the tiny percentage of Russian linked Twitter accounts compared to all election related tweets. Another thing is over half of the Facebook ads that they put out were seen after the election. And so obviously it couldn't have had that much effect if half of them weren't even seen until after the results were already in. And if you go into some of the actual ad purchases that the Russians did here, they don't seem very well informed. Like, for example, like purchasing ads in like a really democratic, safe state, instead of like a battleground state where it would actually might have an effect. A guy named Peter Van Buren tweeted about this. Perhaps maybe you want to get into that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and read through the Peter Van Buren tweet since I have it up here real quick, and now link to this tweet on the show notes page. You know this super big deal Russian influence on our election? Here are actual media buys made, each one stupid and uninformed. Maryland was targeted by nearly 5 times as many ads as Wisconsin. 35 of the 55 ads targeting Wisconsin ran during the primary. More ads targeted Dem-safe D.C. than Battleground Pennsylvania. A total of 1,979 was spent in Wisconsin. All 1,925 of it in the primary. The spending in Michigan and PA was 820, 823, and 300. More of the geo-targeted ads ran in 2015 before Trump even announced than in 2016. Facebook-owned public numbers show 10 million people saw ads run by the Russian agents. 5.6 million views were after the election. Russia accounts for 0.02% of election-related tweets. All right, Will, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this stuff, like, that sounds like a massive influence operation. It sounds like they really knew what they were doing. It was very sophisticated. And of course, we've heard things such as, I think it was a Facebook page about puppies. This is made into this dark, sinister thing trying to take advantage of our sympathies or something for puppies and subvert our democracy. It's like, I don't know, man. It's hard to not just scoff and laugh at this stuff, but really some of the accusations are that absurd.
Right, and I think all this information would definitely support the case Moon of Alabama made, that this wasn't an election targeting ad at all, and that the election was just kind of occurring, and that's what people are tweeting about and memeing about and everything during, between 2015 and 2016. This is what everybody wanted to talk about. This was the most important thing. If you want to get retweets and shares on Twitter, the way you did it is by talking about Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, or Donald Trump. I know I was trying to, increase my Twitter following back then, and I knew that if I tweeted something about Hillary Clinton being awful or Donald Trump being awful, it was likely to get 10 times more retweets than anything I could tweet about the Yemen war. Brian Williams, he uses these adjectives that are absolutely insane. Russia invaded America, that this was some kind of sophisticated operation to wage psychological and intellectual warfare against the American people. I mean, this is absolutely the most insane interpretation of the indictment you could possibly have. I mean, this is something that you would read into it. Like, Alex Jones could construct such an elaborate possible conspiracy out of an indictment that doesn't even mention the Russian government. And so this just seems completely ridiculous to me that this guy gets away with saying this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most absurd things about this, too, is that we've known about the Internet Research Agency and troll farms and stuff. Like, this is not brand new. This is just kind of a rehashing of something that had already been said, within recent months. Of course, now the indictment goes into more detail, but this is not some huge revelation that, oh my God, we're being invaded and attacked. It's just, I don't know. Almost every part of it is ridiculous.
Okay, the last reaction I want to play will kind of get us into a little bit more in a broader take of the Russiagate thing, and this is Rachel Maddow explaining the 3 prongs to Russiagate.
So we've been able to surmise, just as civilians watching this story, right? We've been able to surmise from the beginning that there were 3 prongs to the Russian attack. Right? There were three ways that they attacked us. Number one, they attacked our actual election system. They hacked into the voting rolls in more than 20 states. Two, they attacked the Democratic Party. They hacked into and stole documents and emails from the Clinton campaign and the DNC. And three, they attacked us, the public, or at least they targeted all of us when they decided that they wouldn't just steal those Democratic documents and use them for spying purposes. Instead, they would turn them around and release them back into the U.S. in a weaponized way to try to hurt our perception of one side in the election. They targeted us with those documents that they stole. They targeted us with propaganda. They targeted us with considerable effort to manipulate the American social media environment and all sorts of different online discussions about our election to try to change our perception of our own politics and our own political figures.
Okay, well, here we have the Maddow response and her alleged 3 prongs of the Russia operation against the United States election.
Yeah, there's a lot to get into here with this one, a lot to deconstruct. And so if we take her 3 prongs, like taken all together, she just lists them like this. It sounds like a lot of stuff here. There's actually an argumentative technique called the Gish Gallop, where you just dump a load of tons of information on somebody and hope that they don't, it's too much to even respond to. And so that's sort of what's being done here with the 3 prongs. So if you actually take these individually, none of these were actually found to have been effective. The release of documents, I don't think, has been shown to have been a real significant, swayer of voters, even if the Russians did leak them. And at most they'd be saying that, Russia informed us of true things about our own politicians, as Rachel Maddow says, altering our perceptions. But of course, we dispute that there even was a Russian hand in the hack. It wasn't a hack, it was a leak. So that's the first prong. We've already addressed that. The second, the hacking of our election systems or voter rolls, that was majorly hyped up and blown out of proportion. Nobody's vote was affected. No vote tally was changed. The intention of people who are trying to access these voter rolls is completely unclear. A journalist named Gareth Porter, his work suggests that the attempts to access these voter rolls were way more likely to be routine cybercrime, which happens 24/7, 365, different groups trying to break into government databases. So that's happening constantly. It's not just a Russian who might do that. It's anybody, any cyber criminal. However, the most, I think, devastating thing to the idea that they've hacked these voter rolls is in several of these cases, it's been completely debunked that this actually, state officials in Wisconsin and California and people from Dallas County and Texas have come out and said that didn't happen. There was no hacking attempt on our voting system. They said it was a completely different, unrelated, governmental database that had nothing to do with the election. And of course, we've also, what Rachel Maddow didn't include were the debunked allegations about Russia trying to hack into Vermont's power grid, which is not, there was nothing to that story. And I believe there was another story about an Illinois water utility company that was claimed that Russia tried to hack there. There were claims.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Go back to the voter roll thing really quick. I just want to point out that voter rolls, what that would do would give you the information, like the name and the address and maybe the phone number of registered voters. That isn't them hacking into the voting machines after the election and switching the vote total. I think that's something that is kind of conflated, right? That the idea that they hacked the election by hacking into the voter rolls. And this would make more sense that it would just be regular cybercrime because you're just getting information about people. You're not actually changing anything within the voter system.
Right, exactly. And I think that's what mainly throws the intentions of these attempted access. I should also note that it's all potentially tried to, if you read the wording of the reporting, it's they attempted to access. And only in this tiny handful of cases did they ever actually get through anywhere. However, yeah, we're talking about a database here about voters, not anything to do with voting tallies or voting machines or anything like that. But yeah, this is just one in a long list of claimed, Russian hacks that turned out there's nothing behind them whatsoever.
Right. Another thing I still can't get over is that the media is complaining about the DNC and Podesta emails being leaked themselves. I mean, there's so much important information within those leaks, especially about how the Clinton campaign was emailing back and forth with some journalists, how the DNC rigged the primary in favor of Hillary Clinton to journalists and to somebody, who considers them in that field, like Rachel Maddow. She should absolutely be happy to have this new information. I mean, I guess, maybe she could complain about the method. Should it be illegal? But at the same time, for her problem to be that the people found out that Hillary Clinton cheated Bernie Sanders out of that primary, I don't understand how this could possibly be portrayed as anything but a good thing.
And you can see the way that she tries to spin it, though, is like she'll take one of her prongs, the social media campaign, and she calls that, propaganda and trying to alter our perceptions. And then she just blends that into the DNC document thing, as if those didn't contain true information. So she's going to try to refer to the propaganda operation and then just sweep in the DNC documents, even though nobody's ever disputed the actual veracity of the things in those documents.
Right, and putting them under the three kind of broad umbrella like it's a trident of some kind, and these just aren't three different things that they're alleging happened and went on. There's absolutely no evidence of any kind of grand conspiracy whatsoever. I mean, this is a lie on parallel with the one that they were telling that all 17 intelligence agencies agreed Russia had attacked the election back in January of 2017. Before they finally had to admit that wasn't the case and it was just select analysts from select agencies and not the whole intelligence community like they want you to believe.
Right. And I think the three prongs way to frame it is inaccurate. I think instead of three prongs, this sounds just like three different unrelated theories. And then you just string them together. None of them are very well backed up or sourced, but you just string them all together. Now it's this conspiracy that has three prongs instead of just, okay, your first theory failed. You couldn't support that. So you moved on to a second one of collusion. And that, I don't know. Now it's all about sowing discord. So it just sounds like three separate theories that have failed.
Right. I completely agree with you on that one. I think that's kind of what's going on here is that it's all failing, but she's still just shoveling the spaghetti against the wall, trying to hope that something will stick. Right. Like she just figures that she throws all this information and uses words like former Soviet state rather than Ukraine and conflates Russians with Russia and a Russian intelligence operation. Then maybe she could convince people that Russia hacked our election and Hillary Clinton was cheated and is the rightful president.
Right. I mean, as long as this Mueller investigation continues and there's things like these indictments, we're never going to hear an end of this stuff about Russia and their interference in our democracy.
So, Will, before we wrap up, I want to play a couple more clips as to kind of show maybe the fallout of this indictment while me and Will kind of have gone through and shown that there's nothing in there that proves that Russia had the election or Russia had any kind of operation against the American election. At the same time, I think it's important for us to, how the United States is going to react because, the truthful narrative won't be the accepted one, even by the Trump administration, though it benefits them. So clip one is a clip of Leon Panetta explaining what he believes is the importance of Trump's non-reaction to the Russiagate.
If the president continues to deny or to refuse to condemn the Russians, in effect, then, the president is inviting the Russians to do exactly the same thing they did in 2016.
Okay, well, so is by Trump letting this go, giving Russia the green light to meddle in all American elections from now on?
Yeah, well, let's put that under some scrutiny. And of course, that's Leon Panetta, the former CIA director, and I believe the Secretary of Defense at one point. He's implying here that if we do nothing to Russia, if we do nothing in response to this, they're just going to, they won't be deterred and they'll keep doing it. And so in terms of what our relationship with Russia recently, let's look at some facts here about what, certain aspects of our relationship. So with just in the last few weeks, we have killed Russian defense contractors in Syria. We've approved arms sales to Ukraine's essentially anti-Russian government, which we put in place with the coup d'etat in the first place, which we've discussed on this show. We've announced intentions of a permanent military presence in Syria within the last several weeks, which is Syria is obviously a Russian ally. We've discussed that in depth here. RT and Sputnik, two Russian media agencies, have been forced to register as foreign agents. I believe a Russian consulate in California was shut down. We've expanded NATO closer to Russia to include Montenegro. There's proposed sanctions. And perhaps most alarming of all, in a nuclear posture review, we've lowered the threshold for when we will respond with a nuclear strike. And we've lowered that threshold now in response to cyber attacks. That perhaps in response to a cyber attack that we would, launch a nuclear strike. And so this is particularly worrying with all the claims of Russian election tampering because that stuff could be described as cyber attacks. And now here's our government saying that we might consider using nuclear weapons as a response to such a thing. And so that to me does not sound like we are being soft on Russia. It sounds like we're very hawkish.
Absolutely. You knocked that one out of the park, Will. I want to move on to a racial Maddow clip.
And thanks to this very detailed indictment, we've got a ton of new information about exactly what the special counsel believes Russia did and why the special counsel believes it's not just an American, not just America being victimized by a Russian intelligence operation. Now we've got all this detail about why the special counsel thinks that what Russia did in terms of targeting the U.S. public is an actual crime. Now,
so, Will, I think this is one of the things that Rachel Maddow points out that's actually somewhat of a good observation, that the FBI now interprets that it's a crime for people to publish fake news or for a foreign person to publish fake news. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, just like in terms of establishing a precedent, certainly you can see the interest in doing this in these indictments. As I had mentioned earlier, this likely will not actually come to any kind of real legal outcome with the Russians named in the indictment. They're probably not going to they're not going to see an American courtroom, but it does establish some kind of precedent of like we're trying to criminalize this certain type of behavior, and so certainly it could be useful to them in that way.
Right, and I saw some people posting on Twitter who were Russian nationals reporting during the U.S. election and saying that, well, does this make me am I going to be indicted next? Because that's kind of the path they're taking, is that if they disagree what you say and you're a foreigner and you're posting about the U.S. election, well, then maybe you're guilty of a crime.
Right. I mean, how many times did you and I post things about Brexit just as casual observers of world politics? Does that make us some kind of like a fifth column of the UK's democracy?
Last clip I want to play, and that is Rachel Maddow's big question.
Here's my question and why I'm here tonight. Why bring charges like this against a bunch of Russian people who, frankly, you're not going to get into a courtroom? Why do that? And why do it now? Legally? If in the future you're going to charge other people, you're maybe going to charge Americans with being part of this operation as a criminal conspiracy, does it help the prosecutor to have initially charged the conspiracy as a crime? To be laying down a law that there was a crime here in the first place? If you're going to charge other people with conspiring in this crime later, does it help to have charged this as a crime in the first place?
Another possibly good observation by Maddow on this one is this, is potentially laying the groundwork. If there's already a conspiracy, I guess it makes it easier for you to go after people that you now allege to be in the alleged conspiracy.
Right. I mean, I'm not aware of the fine legal points here. However, I would ask, wouldn't you need some kind of proof of guilt to be shown before that would become like a solid basis for further investigations? Like, is the indictment itself just, obviously that doesn't entail guilt. Is that enough to establish this precedent? Or, I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that question.
The FBI probably takes it as such.
Definitely.
All right. Well, so before we wrap up here, do you have any final thoughts, observations on the quote unquote big indictment, the big news that we got on Russiagate?
Yeah, I think there's not a whole, like I said, there's not a whole lot new here in the first place. We have some details of the potential ways in which these private people may have tried to troll our democracy. But yeah, I generally no, I don't think there's really much new here that's alarming or devastating to, our case here.
Yeah, the only thing I picked up from this is it seems like the narrative, again, has changed from Russia hacked the election to Russia meddled in the election. And now I think what they're going to start to push towards is this idea that Russia is trying to sow discord in America. One of the reasons that they're going to have to do this is because it was clear from the indictment that Russia wasn't just supporting Donald Trump and had provided some, support for, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders as well through their information. And so now the idea is, well, they're just trying to divide Americans, which seems like an awfully ridiculous thing. Like Russia would be able to post memes that are able to ultimately divide Americans. You know what I mean? Like, don't you have to give the American people a little bit more credit than that? But there was an interesting article posted by NBC News that I'll link to in the show notes page, where it talks about this group, Hamilton 68, and how their dashboard picked up that there was a lot of Russian-linked accounts saying that, are, I guess, posting about the Parkland, right? This is Parkland shooting in Florida there. So one of the things that the article points out is that it makes the assumption that either people were posting in favor of gun control or it implies that they were Russian trolls attacking people who are in favor of gun control.
Yeah, I find that Hamilton 68 dashboard thing to be fascinating. I think there's like at least three different outfits that are sort of do the similar kind of what I would call dubious research. You know, you had this organization called Prop or Not, Propaganda or Not, who came out in the Washington Post and gave their list of news outlets they thought were Russian stooges. And of course, how they come to that conclusion is like by very dubious methods. Antiwar.com was linked in there as one of those Russian stooges, so I guess that'd include you and I with our associations with that site. You also have CrowdStrike, the firm that was hired by the DNC to investigate the initial hacking claim. A lot of their research is based on the stuff of linking a threat group to a particular type of hacking, and it's very nebulous. It's sort of like when you really look into it, you find it sort of turtles all the way down. You can make links to people constantly, but it's not really solid research. So I thought the Hamilton 68 dashboard thing is just a good example of that.
Yeah, I do think the only thing I worry about here is that maybe this idea that Russia was trying to sow discord will be something that the Trump side kind of accepts, and then we'll lay the Russiagate narrative to rest as saying that Russia, sowed discord in the American election in 2016, and that'll allow for continued the idea that we saw in the defense strategy that Maddow laid out, that our problem is now with great powers in Russia and trying to undermine our election and democracy around the world. And so I think that's the real risk here to what we're going to get as a final narrative as this thing kind of hopefully dies. I mean, God damn, am I tired about hearing about it in the mainstream media.
Me too, definitely. And I think it's interesting that, like, as this thing, it started with hacking, it's a very specific, concrete allegation. It started expanding to collusion, and now we're getting a little more vague. And now we're at sowing discord. And now at the sowing discord stage of this narrative, now it's useful to any kind of Russia hawk. It's not just useful to Democrats. As you're saying, who knows how this narrative is going to be taken and spun as a bludgeon for Russia hawks in general.
Right. Well, do you have anything else more to add on this, Will?
No, I think we hit every point.
All right. Well, where would you like to send people?
Yeah, you can check out my work. It's in the featured article section at the blog of the Libertarian Institute. Occasionally they run me in the viewpoint section of antiwar.com, and I've got a large author archive at a place called the Daily Sheeple. And you can find my Twitter. You can also find the Daily Sheeple article archive on my Twitter at WKP ANCAP, ANCAP.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Hopefully this will be the last time I have you on to debunk Russiagate stuff, but who knows the way things are going. I'm certainly going to have you on the show again. If anybody would like to find the show, libertarianinstitute.org, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, Libertarian Union on Twitter, or at KYAAALE on Twitter. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Kyle.